So, Deacon and Erik, thank you so much for joining our StreamYard link platform, which will be going to our YouTube. We're going to ask you a few questions, discuss the CoOp Wars, and a little bit about your background. So we will ask both of you the same question. So me and Jessica will go back and forth, with the questions, and both of you all can answer the question.
But don't feel obliged to answer.
Yeah.
I have an answer.
Okay.
There are about 8 questions.
Yes.
Sounds great. And thanks for your interest in all of this. I'm really excited to have this screening.
Our whole co-op and the collective of startups, as well as Sugar Beet, they're very excited, because we're in that world. So we want to definitely be able to learn more about it. Jessica has been part of the co-op world since 2013. And I've been part of the co-op world almost a year. Always, new things to learn, and it's fascinating. And to just, learn about what happened in the Twin Cities is fascinating and intriguing. So I think our viewers are going to really enjoy, you all talking about the film.
You want to kick us off, David?
Yes. So the first question is, why do you feel that CoOp Wars was an important story to tell the masses, this documentary?
Good question. I guess I'll go first. So it's important from a bunch of different perspectives, one of which is that people sort of take co-ops and even natural foods for granted these days as just some, another option that people have to shop. Places where there are co-ops, sometimes it's just equivalent to, they think, is a high-end, Whole Foods or whatever like that. And to let people realize that these were grassroots organizations started by people who wanted to create social change. And they developed in a way that responded to people's needs, both for less processed foods, but then also shaped those needs, and they created basically the natural foods idea that now is a much more mainstream idea and has transformed the way people eat. That's super important. And as well, it's a social change story too, activist story of how people who came together, first of all, through other movements, through the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, wanted to apply their social justice framework to the world of food and the world of business and economics. And this was the way they did it, and that just because they identified the problems with the current system doesn't mean they agreed on what they should create, or that they were good at cooperating with each other sometimes. And that created, in this instance, this actual, war with violence and really harsh feelings, but that was eventually resolved, and that still has echoes today. And that's an interesting story for people doing activism at all times to see and to try to avoid those problems, and also see the positive aspects that came out of it, that can even come out of something that's really, seems negative at the time, that can help people develop as they go on.
That's the piece that really excited me. I love the story just as far as understanding food justice and how this system came about and what it could be, but the more universal lessons that kind of this tale tells of how people that don't agree on everything, can or cannot manage to work together. This is a group of young, left-leaning activists coming out of the 60s. How could they try almost tear it all apart with their disagreements? But even among that common group, that could happen, and I think today of any times, we're struggling with that ability to sort of cooperate with people that we don't agree with everything about, and work on things together. So I think it reaches beyond even just, the food systems. And that's, I think, a big piece of why it's a good story to get out there.
Okay. So the next question.
Oh, okay. So do you feel that the premise of the film is art imitating life in co-ops nationwide?
What's the art in this particular?
Well, I'm involved in an organization here in the Twin Cities called Art to Change the World. And that's it's a group of artists that you want their art to serve that purpose. And I think sometimes documentary filmmakers, some see it as more as journalism, but I think it is an art form, and I think it's one that often is very much focused on social change, so directly. But I think what makes it effective is we tell the story factually, what happened in the history of it. But we were able to do it, and working with a bunch of talented people to get an emotional angle on it and really feel it on that level, which I think can bring people to that, cognitive dissonance when you that moment where you suddenly realize maybe you haven't been seeing things quite the way they are. All that.
That's the beauty of art.
Absolutely. Tell us about your drive and passion about, in your case, Erik, production, filmmaking, and Deacon, yours with directing.
Sure. Deacon, you want to go first this time?
Sure. I think we both sort of backed into this industry in unusual ways. I'm a teacher. I taught for a long time in Minneapolis public schools as a social studies teacher, and got interested in using film with my students as a good project-based way to have a voice, not just learn about something, but to make their imprint on it and get their messages out there beyond the classroom even. And that got me into doing my own film, taking my own film more seriously, just so I wouldn't get so interested in what they were doing. And that little by little led into doing short docs. And this is my first full-length feature that took a while, but ready to go on to the next one.
Yeah, and my original background was in theater, so telling stories was something I was interested in all along, but then ended up working in cooperatives and working on economic democracy, and then sometimes also getting jobs in public TV or in independent filmmaking, mostly from the promotional side of things. And so that put me in contact with the whole world of documentary, which I've always loved in the first place, and very concretely put me in a job where I was working with Deacon, and right about the time that I had learned about the CoOp Wars as a story and thought that this needs to be told, I proposed it to Deacon, and then we went forward. But it combines the two things I really love, which is the storytelling, especially about historical topics, and economic justice and cooperatives.
Do you see this film setting precedent or being a template for traditional big box retailers or movie producers?
Template for producers.
Feature films, for documentaries.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're in the golden age of food documentaries right now, and there's been so many of them. And what I saw is sort of a gap in that, and there's lots of documentaries about some bad thing involving the food system, genetic engineering or corporate agriculture or whatever. And then there's all the other ones which are this advocacy about we should be doing X. And something that is more complex out of a very specific historical situation it's sort of been missing, in that it's not something where you can definitely figure out this is the bad thing, get rid of the bad thing, this is the good thing, it's a good thing. It's like a complex human story, and I think that is helpful for people who are activists or organizers to know this kind of stories, because they can put themselves in the place of various characters and see how just because you have good intentions doesn't mean you end up doing the right thing. And you learn by sort of bumping up against other people's ideas. And so I would hope that there's more documentaries like this about a variety of social justice topics, really gets into the nitty-gritty of what happened with an aim towards having activists have a very complex view of things that would help inform their own activism.
I hope so as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, that one of the themes from the film is one of the strategies of the Marxist side that sort of got militant was to heighten the controversy, which is, we're living in a lot of that right now, but the dangers of that strategy. Yeah,
heighten the contradictions was the Maoist motto. And so it was very intentionally trying to get people to disagree in order to sort of sort people out, who's on your side and who's not, which is sort of counter to the idea of cooperation. And so it's an interesting lesson.
So where do you both find your inspiration to create these, compelling documentaries and films?
Stories just come along, like Erik and I, this film, a conversation that leads to something. I think in a lot of art forms and things, what is important is the ability to take that idea and actually follow through with it. It took us, I'm not even sure how many years it took us to make this film. Was it 8? We shot a lot of it in 2015. It takes time, but to not give up on that. I mean, especially when you're doing things independently with not huge budgets and
right.
Yeah, and part of, for me, I love history in general, but specific stories I'm really attracted to often relate to the things that I value in my life and wonder where they came from. Mm-hmm. So it was in my late 20s that I discovered food co-ops, basically more from an interest in economic democracy than from a food angle at all. Right. And then it became this wonderful part of my life, and I met so many people through it, and I wanted to know where it came from and how this happened. I also worked for a family farm organization, and so that made me interested in the whole family farm organizing movement of the 1980s. I'd love to do a doc about that. I worked in the fair trade movement, and I ended up meeting Mexican coffee farmers from Oaxaca, and they told me the story of the 10 years of Bible study they did before they started their fair trade cooperative, and all of these sort of origin stories of these things we take for granted are really compelling to me. So this is part of that.
And social justice has been a theme, and those are the stories I'm looking for. A friend who was part of Vest for Peace was taking a bus ride with protesters down to Fort Benning some years back. So I was like, oh, why don't I film that? And that sort of thing, things that you're in circles of worlds you're interested in, and then things come along that need pursuing.
My next question is, how would you assess co-op culture in rural, suburban, and urban areas?
Well, the co-ops that I've worked for have all been in urban areas. North Country Co-op in Minneapolis, which no longer exists, but was by the university there. And I've worked at Central Co-op here in Seattle as well. And then I've had contact with suburban cooperatives through suburban and more rural cooperatives. And, there are some real similarities in that the co-ops we talk about in this film came out of this counterculture. And there was sort of a white version of that and a black version of that in the Twin Cities. But they're both countercultural in different ways, both sort of aligned with leftist, politics and such. And if you look at co-ops, even in smaller places, a lot of the country, it's in a college town. So there's this association with higher education, interest in it. So there's this commonality across the board. The culture can be different depending on often more to do with the scale of the co-op. Here in Seattle, we have PCC, which is the biggest co-op in the country. It's got, 13 locations or something now. It's huge, and it's still owned by its members, but you have to have big corporate experience to be on the board, and it's sort of hard to feel like you're a participant. And then there's little co-ops in Port Townsend or something, Washington here, or in smaller towns, and it feels like a little community gathering place. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the origin of what the urban co-ops were like too, is you and your pals sort of start something and they volunteer at the store and whatever. And that was awesome and served this purpose, but isn't economically viable in the long term. So the fact that co-ops now have to start out with much bigger sales and much more professionalism is, there's a good reason for that. And it actually serves the members' needs food-wise better, but doesn't have that same clubhouse feeling, which can also be bad. Clubhouse feelings can also exclude people. So it's really interesting to see what cultures get created out of these startup co-ops. And I imagine even amongst those 4 different startups you have there in Chicago, it's going to be, very different feel to how they get going. And I'm really intrigued to actually find out more about that.
When we started this project, I was involved with a co-op that was starting up in North Minneapolis that I thought was part of the story. We'd be following that storyline. And then also this other co-op that was opening in a more marginalized community that didn't have access to food, that was being started by that's in the film, the Seward Co-op, this big multi-million-dollar co-op that was supporting the idea, getting some pushback from neighbors and learning how to, actually do it in cooperation with the neighbors. But I thought the storyline would be that this small startup that I was connected with that was very grassroots, coming from the neighborhood organization, was going to be the thing that would really work, because it would have people in the community really behind it and all that, and that some big, co-op planting a thing in the neighborhood isn't going to work. But that's not the story the way it turned out. And Worth Co-op that I'd worked on, it took years and years for it to open, and it was open for about 5 months. Just a lot of challenges when a lot of resources that we didn't have that they had at the Seward when they were doing that. And I'm not sure if that's a story of how things have to go in the future, but it's how things played out here. The big positive is that Seward learned how to do it and work with the community, and bring their resources to that community and not force them on them, I guess.
Well, this would bring me to the next question. What advice would you give? We are both in Chicago. As you know, the Dill Pickle is the only co-op in the city limits. Sugar Beet is right on the outskirts in Oak Park, Illinois. And we have 4, Prairie Co-op in Lombard, Southside Co-op is going to be on the south side of Chicago. Wild Onion is in a neighborhood called Rogers Park on the border of Evanston, Illinois, and Chicago Market, which is in Uptown. What advice would you give to these startup co-ops? Because going back to the 70s all the way up to 2021, there's different challenges, there's different issues, but it's almost things going in cycles as far as social injustice or social change. Activism is at an all-time high. Unfortunately, it's a lot of division within the country. Yeah, what advice would you both of you all give for these co-ops in Chicago, the third largest market? I think people still don't realize that we don't really have a co-op culture, because that part co-op lasted from 1932 to 2008, and then we came in 2009, and we've been the only one, and we've had a lot of peaks and valleys, ebbs and flows, and challenges and obstacles. But just from your perspective, coming from Seattle and the Twin Cities, what advice could you offer these startups?
Well, yeah, like you said, the situation is so different from the 70s.
Yeah.
The natural foods market is there, so like people are familiar with this. It's not a fringe thing, so that's great. You also have competition from corporate stores you've never had before. You also have the assistance of national cooperative organizations that have a lot of expertise to help you out. So that's fantastic and been developed for years and years and years. And then there's also this totally different perception of like when you open what it is. The stores in our story, they opened and what people thought was like, there's some dirty hippies over there, or in their little store. And now we open up and some people get this based on Whole Foods, this idea that, oh, it's a fruit store for rich people or something like that. So it's a very different situation, as you said. And the things that pop into my mind are what I've seen some other co-ops starting up around the country is tension between the co-op as a social justice or a political organization and the co-op as a business is really important. You sort of have to put the business first in the way that you really have to serve the actual needs of the neighborhood and not the needs you hope they have, or not the needs that you think they should have. I think that was part of the problem with Worth Co-op is they tried to sort of bridge two neighborhoods that had really different needs. And it was a very noble effort to like bring people with very different class and racial backgrounds into the same co-op. We sort of ended up in a middle ground where neither of them felt served by the co-op. Actually, like being very focused on what the people in your area want and what is not being served by the corporations nearby. That's important because that's the money that comes in that makes it all work. And then with the social justice aspect of it to it, if that is lost, then you also, there's no reason to have the co-op, and you don't have a competitive advantage with the Whole Foods either. And there's no reason for people, there's less reason for people to feel like it's theirs. And so having a vibrant member culture, getting ways for them to get involved and feel informed and educated and give them something to do, even when there's not like volunteering in the store to do, and find ways to use the co-op's energy to focus people on making society better. I think that's essential. And I think with the co-ops getting more successful nationwide as businesses sometimes gets lost because it's not essential to making the business work. But in the broader sense, it is essential. Because it's the whole reason for them not to go to Whole Foods and the whole reason for the people to be involved. So I think finding ways to channel people's energy and enthusiasm through the co-op to make the world better is still very important, while very tangibly serving their needs for the products they happen to really want.
Yeah, and our story even touches on that your point about needing to serve the community. That was one of the things that the cooperative organization in the CoOp Wars story I think did really well that the co-ops didn't maybe take the lesson from, was to survey the communities. And then when the contemporary story that we follow succeeds, that's what they talk about is we engage the community, the importance of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, like when activists try to start businesses, they're engaging two different parts of people's minds. And the activist side is the side where your super ego, your idea of what should happen and what people should do. But if you apply that to a business and you don't take into account people's like self-interest, then that's where things don't mesh as well. When we looked at this concrete example from the stories in our story, we had sort of a conflict between some people who were very food purists, and people should eat this way and only this way, and we shouldn't have white sugar and we shouldn't have anything that's I disapprove of. And that was ultimately unsuccessful because people wanted a wide variety of things, and people didn't want to be lectured to. On the other side, the co-op organization, the Marxist organization, they were the ones promoting corporate food because they said that's what the masses wanted. But they were forgetting that if they sold exactly what was in the corporate store, corporate supermarket, they could never sell it for as cheap as the corporate supermarkets because they were a little store, and there would be no reason for people to go to their little store instead of just buying in the corporate supermarket. So, so either way, they were like forgetting the business side of things, and that you need to like be able to sell the product at the price that people really want, and while putting out the product that you feel good about, and being flexible about that. So,
Sure, you have to educate people about the product you want them to buy. And then you do that by bringing them into the store with products that you don't want them to buy.
And then they're also like, there's varying levels of perfection about that, and people have varying, different ideas about what that should be. And so you got to be tolerant of diversity of opinion about that.
Yep, I agree. And the Dill Pickle is doing that right now.
That's cool.
And I can add, Erik and Deacon, and of course Jessica, that one thing that Chicago, the co-ops that are coming, they can learn the history of the Hyde Park Co-op. That would be a fascinating documentary to do.
Oh yeah,
learning just trajectory that we've been through. I mean, there's been some highs and there's been some lows, but one thing I can say, the community is very supportive of having co-op in our community.
Great.
As well as the city. So, I mean, it's not just the Logan Square, Avondale, Hermosa area, but a lot of people from the city or, the surrounding suburbs will come there. Use our online local delivery, to purchase, these products. So that's very encouraging. So I'm really hoping that this film for our cooperative co-ops, they have a chance to just assess and really research and see us and Sugar Beet existing, seeing what we face, because it's not easy. It's not easy, but it's rewarding because you're doing something for the community. So that's the passion and the drive that you have to make, this co-op grocery store work. Just my less than a year experience, and Jessica can probably say they have a lot more years of experience. So
yes, it takes passion and commitment.
Yep,
it does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd like to say this for myself, like ongoing, I'm interested in the story of Dill Pickle and how that happened. And so if there's something we can do in the future, written or audio or something to help tell that story, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely coordinate that.
Yep.
Cool.
That segues into my last question. Are there plans to highlight other co-ops capturing social change or challenges they may have faced?
Right now, the way we were sort of going about that is we're doing the Chicago event is the first event we're doing with co-ops, but we're doing one with Eastside Co-op in Minneapolis a week later, and then another one with Brattleboro Co-op in Vermont after that. And what we want to do is to do a lot of these Q&As with co-ops around the country and use the Q&As and perhaps written pieces outside of it to talk about what they're doing with their situations and why they thought this was interesting and what they're doing to be more inclusive as well, and what they've done in the past and what their history is. So we see this as sort of an ongoing, this distribution of the film itself is an ongoing discussion with co-ops amongst themselves, and maybe we'll find some way to get those discussions out to the general public as well.
And that was for a long time kind of our main purpose for the film, was to use it, launch it as a vehicle for conversations. Way of distributing it is ideal, to have this kind of screening and conversation. I'm so happy that we can be supportive of your co-op and by doing that.
Yeah. Well, we are super honored that you are highlighting, your film, to our Chicagoland co-op community. We can't wait to the week-long streaming and the Q&A event. I'm really excited about that.
Great. Yeah, so are we.
Very honored.
We're honored.
Well, that's the last question. Is there anything else you'd like to share or add?
I'll definitely be stopping by Dill Pickle when I'm in the Chicago area. Can't wait to check it out.
Yes, I did an art semester in Chicago way back in the day, and I just loved the city, and I'm so excited to see the fact that the co-op movement there is getting going in a brand new way. That's fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, in the next 2 years, we should have all of them open, probably with the exception of Southside Co-op. I think they're in the very infancy stage.
Okay.
So they're going to probably take, and I could be wrong, but Chicago Market is probably the closest one, and then Prairie. So there may be 2022, around this time, 2022, and I think Wild Onion may be 2023. Cool. So everything is tentative. So it could be sooner or it could be a little bit later, but within the next 2 years, 2022, 2023, I know Chicago Market already has a GM, so they are,
Yeah, they hired my old boss at Central Co-op here.
Oh, wow, okay. Yeah. My GM, my boss, she's very familiar with Dan, so he has, he's here in the city, he's getting things ramped up. They're tied into the Uptown Farmers Market there, so they're really getting things going. So I think they may be the ones that come out first, that open first.
Awesome. And the last thing I'm going to do is make sure you know that I was wearing this co-op.
Hey.
All day, every day.
I love the t-shirt, by the way.
Thank you. It's the British Columbia Co-op Association t-shirt.
I was going to ask, where can
okay, yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks, y'all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for taking this time out to, speak to us, and we look forward to, everyone collectively seeing, the film and, having this discussion on the Q&A on Tuesday, October 5th, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. All right, thank you. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Erik.
Bye, Deacon. Bye, Erik. Nice meeting you, Deacon.
Yeah, good.